Good morning, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for coming today for our online streaming audience. Very sustainable of you to join us live and online. My name is Dr. Jodie Nelson-Tabor, and I'm the Business Development and Training Manager for Final Pixel and run the Academy side, the training side. And I'm here to bring our VP Green 2023 to you. For those of you who don't know what VP Green is, it started last year with a colleague of mine when I was a senior lecturer at the University of Greenwich. And it was sort of born out of our aim to start a really important conversation around virtual production being a change agent for sustainability, for reducing our carbon footprint. And it turned out lots of people were having these conversations in sort of parallel areas. So we were able to bring together lots of stakeholders across the industry and start these conversations. And I'm very happy to have its second year. And we're here at Breda in Netherlands. And I'm really excited to bring a world-renowned panel to you this year, and also our hosts and our keynote. So just a quick thank you as well to Breda University for hosting this year. We were coming off the back of their incredible VP gathering event yesterday, where we had lots of people talking about technologies within VP. It was very, very exciting. And also a special thank you to CITRIC, which is the Creative Technologies Research Center and School of Arts and Creative Industries at LSBU, and also Workflowers, Cedric Lejeune, who is also going to be our keynote this morning. And just a quick rundown of our state of play for today. After we have our keynote, we will have our panel of distinguished guests who will talk about the current state of play with sustainability and carbon emissions within VP and lessons of the past and what's next. This is the live streaming information. Those of you obviously who are live, you're with us today. But just note that you'll need to subscribe to the channel if you want to ask any questions during the live stream in the chat. And then we'll be able to answer those questions as they come through. After we finish with the panel, we're going to do a co-design session. This was something that we did last year as well, which was really engaging because we had both the audience that was here live with us and also online be able to engage on a Miro board. And we've set up a similar session for you this year as well to take the learnings from last year and then implement some new data that was provided by Workflowers in a pre-event survey. And we'll talk more about that when we get to that. So our schedule today is for our keynote, which I will introduce here in a moment, and then our panel, and then we're going to take a short break for those of you who are here live, and then we'll do our co-design session, and then we'll have closing remarks. So it's a pretty close, pretty short, but very intense day. This is the information for the Miro board link. So those of you who are streaming online, you would have received an attendee pack. You will need to log into the Miro board using this share link so that you can iterate and engage with us remotely on the board. And then also post-event, please join us on our Discord server so that we can continue the conversation. We aim to have another event next year, and just it's building. So there's twice as many people this year than there was last year. So that's really exciting to see momentum building. Okay, so I will go back to Cedric, and I will give you a quick introduction. So our keynote, Cedric Lejeune, in 2000, started as a visual effects assistant at Discrete Smoke, working on Tribal X, a complex full CG mocap production for children and setting the network infrastructure in a small post-production facility. He then became an application engineer for PostLogic, a French VFX system reseller, and supported a wide range of products such as animation, infrastructure, effects, and color grading. He was in charge of the implementation of the first industrial digital intermediate pipeline at Eclair Laboratories in 2002, and different setups in Paris and Europe. In 2006, he started his first company, Workflowers, to develop consulting and training services, accompanying film labs in the transition to digital and helping post-production to step into the cinema world. He specializes in digital cinema and video workflows, infrastructures, and color science. His work in online collaborative environments and content management tools have made him an expert of cloud technologies for media. Workflowers' image processing tools are used by major studios all over the world. In 2015, he joined the European cinema group, Imagis, to supervise the technology for post-production and mastering labs within the group across New York, London, Liège, Berlin, Barcelona, and Paris. The integration of Eclair laboratories extended the delivery of content to broadcasters and OTT and developed a century-old brand as an innovative one. He then assembled the technology and innovation team to create more efficient and global workflows across the group. He led the development of Eclair Color, the HDR solution for cinema. In 2020, while continuing R&D efforts for Eclair Color and developing HDR and HFR image technologies for the Chinese market, he rebooted Workflowers to help media industries in their transition into a more sustainable model. With his team of media engineers, he helps studios in building and implementing organization and technical strategies with sustainability in mind. He's a member of the EBU Sustainability Group, the SMPTE Cloud Sustainability Working Group, and a founding member of La Cartouche Verte, an association to promote good environmental practices in animation movie production. With Workflowers, he partnered with Perfect Memory for the development of their semantic technology toolset for the movie studio environment. Cedric is also the co-head of the post-production department at CST and is a member of VES, SMPTE, and HPA. Would you like to come up? Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I'm having this one. Good morning, everyone. Wow, let's do technology stuff. Yes, I'm very happy to be in here this morning with you guys and to discuss about the environmental impact and sustainability of virtual production. We had yesterday a great conference showing all the latest advancements on the topic. We see that it's a big shift in the industry. It has the opportunity to actually bring some big changes also on the environmental impact, especially transportation. That has been obviously a main discussion topic and gain over the last couple of years. So what I would like to discuss is really where we are going with that technology and find what are the components of the environmental impact of virtual production. So yeah, I feel a bit old when I hear my bio. You know, so, yeah, done a lot of stuff with Workflowers. At that time, the transitioning the industry from film to digital was a big topic. It was not only about technology, it was also about mindset. Getting the people's skill set into the digital world was a big shift and a big challenge for companies. I think what we are doing now in the media industry by shifting to more sustainable workflows is pretty much the same kind of level of change that we have to deal with. It might sound a bit different, but we are an industry that relies more and more on technology, as we see. And we also have this mindset that new is better, bigger is better. So how do we change that to actually make this industry more sustainable? That's probably the most challenging part of it. So Workflowers is an engineering service company. So we have engineers. The carbon calculation, we consider it as a KPI. We consider that it's a good way to identify in the way a company works in its organization whether a workflow is efficient or not, because our industry and actually any industry relies on finance to see if something is making money or not. But right now, especially with new technologies and new way of doing things, we often consider that money should be the only indicator. Carbon calculation is actually a very good way to see if stuff works or doesn't. So that's why it's something that we consider being very important when analyzing organization and optimizing organization. A first information. This is something from Electricity Map. It's an app, and I encourage you to give a look at this website. Right now in the Netherlands, every kilowatt emits about 470 grams of CO2. That's pretty big. Why is it important? It's because actually the whole problem of sustainability of new technology, actually a big part of it is about energy consumption. And also the strategies you will develop on putting together a sustainability strategy will be different from one place to another. If you're in Sweden, where the emissions per kilowatt are a tenth of that, you will manage things a different way. If you're in Poland, where they're actually almost twice that, that's also something different. So it's not, and that's where sometimes it's a bit frustrating. Virtual production is like the cloud, is like actually any technology. It's not good or bad. It works for the context. So last year, and thanks to a green screen, and there is a Lewis in here, we were asked to actually dig into the big equation of virtual production to identify where sustainability could bring stuff in the equation of environmental impact. In this equation, we found some very positive aspects. Obviously, less transportation, and at a time during the COVID crisis where we couldn't move, it was actually a very strong point. What we saw as well is because you can actually very quickly change your setup and everything, you reduce shooting time. And in our industry, actually, a lot of the carbon emission come from obviously the transportation of people, but also the hotels, the food. All of that actually contributes a lot because we are very labor-intensive industry. So less shooting days means obviously a big reduction. Less post-production as well, because this post-production is also a very labor-intensive task. So if we reduce that, we reduce carbon emission and less waste from the set construction. But on the other side, what we saw is the power consumption of LED volumes is actually pretty big, and something that is also very new when we consider the impact of digital technology in general is that the energy consumption is an important point. And as I mentioned earlier, it depends on where the energy comes from. But then you have the manufacturing impact. We are talking about new technologies, and to make the equipment, you need to dig the earth and get some materials, some copper, a lot of very complex chemical process get in the game of manufacturing all the equipment we use. And this is certainly not something that we should consider. We actually need to process that into the calculation of the environmental impact, because it's not only about carbon emissions, about the greenhouse gases, it's also about the impact on biodiversity, pollution of water, also the water consumption. What's happening right now in Taiwan is that they don't have enough water to actually produce all the chips we need for technology. And this is something that happens in a lot of places. Water is a big issue, and it's something that should be part of the equation pretty much as the greenhouse effect. So we have a lot of hardware components. The IT infrastructure of a virtual production studio is actually a mix between what you would have in a small TV station, like video mixers and audio, and also, and obviously the camera stuff, the walls, but also you have something that is closer to what you would have in a typical post-production studio, because you need to produce the content that is shown in the walls. And for that, obviously, you need to have something that is pretty much the same as a VFX studio or an animation studio. So we're talking about pretty significant infrastructure with also a footprint both on the power consumption and on the manufacturing. When we're talking about the LEDs, you have to consider that a a setup that, like the one that were displayed yesterday in the projects, the one on the bottom is a couple of tons. I mean, you can reach 10, 15, 20 tons of LEDs. So imagine the impact, what it takes to actually manufacture that equipment. That's crazy. And it's not only the LED, but also all the equipment you have in the background, the processing servers, all the machinery and all that, and also the infrastructure to hold that. So all of that, it's not transparent. It's certainly something that we need to consider in the equation. And talking about the process of the carbon impact of LED, the manufacturing process is actually something very complex. And every new technology comes with more complex process. That means more water. That means more chemical passes and all that. So, and that is something that is true for any industry right now. To consume less energy or to have better performance, we have a larger manufacturing impact. We have something that we put more concentration, more in the processes and all that. So at the end of the day, we have something that has a huge impact on the environment. And again, it's not only about the carbon, it's really about the overall thing. And we don't have information. During my study, I couldn't find any full life cycle analysis of LED products, at least the one we use. I couldn't make some comparison with, for example, the technology that is used for the phones and tablets in the TVs. But again, imagine the impact of having 20 tons of TVs. That's pretty big. And an important point as well is that most of those LEDs are produced in Shenzhen, China. That means that in the current geopolitical situation, at some point, shortage might also be a part of the equation of sustainability, not in the sense of environmental sustainability, but also business sustainability. If you cannot get access to the technology, you need to work. What is also very interesting in this is that we have a very nice diversity of setups for the studios, permanent, semi-permanent, mobile. Actually, we found that at the end of the day, it's pretty logical because it's the same as for physical studios, film studios. You have small ones, bigger ones. What is new there is actually it took a bit of a time for people to think about what would work. We are still in a very experimental phase of the deployment of virtual production technology. So that means that right now people are trying things. The good thing also during the COVID crisis was that a lot of the LED panels that were used for live events and concerts and all that were at home. So a lot of people could experiment with that equipment. And that is also something that gave the opportunity to try things, try on technical setups, but also business models with that. So right now, we are in this situation where we start to have an experience of what actually works and what doesn't. And some people are actually reconsidering their model around that, which also I believe is a great move, and also a reason why we should think a little about how this impacts the business as a whole, because what we also see is that some of the setups are actually closing because the cost of operation, especially with the energy cost. I mean, I did show the carbon footprint of electricity, but you all know what is the cost of electricity right now. It's actually making some VFX and animation facilities close just because of operation cost. Something that we should really consider in the whole process and also in the measurement of the impact is actually the content that is displayed in the walls. Because it's actually a whole process, it's a whole creative process that can be, again, that can rely to post-production and visual effects. So potentially you can have a huge time and resource consumed to produce that content. So that should be measured. The opportunity though is that you can reuse a lot of that content, especially if you are talking about landmark places, where, for example, you have, Tour Eiffel. If you want to have the Tour Eiffel, you don't need to redo it at every single movie you do with Tour Eiffel or Château de Versailles or the Breda University. You do it once. But then the question is about the right management. That is certainly a problem, because who owns the right of the Tour Eiffel? That's an issue. For example, you have to pay for that or that. So we also need to find the right business model to avoid redoing and reading every time. So that is something where reusing content is a huge challenge. I mean, it's something we've been working with Movie Labs, which is the R&D entity of the Hollywood Film Studios, trying to find a way to find an asset, a CG asset in a whole pipeline. Right now, in a lot of situations, it's actually easier, faster, and cheaper to rebuild the whole thing than trying to take it from a project you did like 2 years ago. In a lot of places, because of the complexity of the pipelines, compatibility issues, and all that, this is almost impossible. So this is a topic that we need to work on, because, again, if we can reuse, it's always the same thing in sustainability, is reduce, reuse, and recycle. Reuse is certainly something where we can have some leverage. So reusing content means having CG elements that you can get. It's actually something with the environment we have now, especially with Unreal and Megascans and all that. It actually changed a bit the mindset when people start to build an environment. And this is something actually coming more from the video game stuff. People are more used to get stuff and drag and drop in Unreal and all that to go faster than actually rebuild everything from the ground. In lots of situations, in lots of studios, people say, okay, you need to do that, so they restart, they don't even think about trying to get something that is already there. So that's also a mindset. Not only a mindset, but also bring up all the tools that can connect, because, again, issues with compatibility between creative softwares and all that, and right management, that is something that is a bit of a technical challenge. So in this study, we worked on a SIGGRAPH paper that was released last year from the Baden-Württemberg Animation Institute in Germany. What was interesting is that they compared two productions. One made the traditional way with a green screen, and the other with a virtual production setup. It was a small one, but it's actually something that is quite comparable to what you have in small commercials environment. Like, I think it was a 10 meter by 4. So it's not a large volume, but it's something, I mean, considering the ambitions of both projects, it was a good comparison. Obviously, it's very difficult to compare apple to apple, because you never do twice the same project, but at least it gave some good indications. What is very interesting in that, and again, I'm taking the number of energy. If you compare the energy in the different countries, you see that we have order of magnitudes of the impact between different countries. So again, that is something you need to think about, because this was done in Germany. But if you take the same number of kilowatt hour and multiply that by the energy mix, you have completely different numbers, and that is something that obviously will make benefit in some situation and won't in other situation. So what was also very interesting in that, when we look at those numbers and modelize, which is our specialty, what we do at Workflowers is we modelize the infrastructure of the studios, so we can tell one day of VFX artist and animation artist is that much carbon. Actually, most of the reduction comes from less working days. Technically, it's not about the power consumption or anything like that, but that is something that at some point we need to think about what in the virtual production paradigm is actually optimizing the number of production days. because this is probably the biggest leverage with transportation. Yeah, I'm taking the modelization is there is a link of the study, and you could download the full study on the website. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, we obviously it's using the same number, so the same power consumption for the machines and all that. What we could have changed is the power consumption for the building and all that, but we didn't go that far. That's actually something again. If we look at, we just released a study for a French animation studio, and what was very interesting is if you compare the carbon emissions between the infrastructure, so we're talking about the building, the air conditioning, what is the workers' impact, so we're talking about commuting, mostly commuting and the food, and then the equipment. In France, because we have the electricity mix doesn't emit much carbon. In fact, it's pretty small in the equation. The equipment itself, and we include the manufacturing impact, is less than 20%. But that would be a completely different equation again if we were in here or in Germany or in Spain. So we must make the decision using that equation. In the meantime, after our study, Sony Studios also released a study. Actually, it's very interesting because they are not studying the same thing. We didn't have access to information about the transportation and thing in the study we used as a basis. This one is actually taking that, but it's actually taking everything we didn't take and the other way around. So, for example, they didn't take the process of the content creation for the walls. They didn't take the impact of the walls both for energy and manufacturing, and neither for post-production. So that is also something where actually we need to find a way, and that's what we'll discuss later. How do we actually measure the overall impact to make sure that what we take here doesn't move somewhere else? That's very, very important. So actually, that's why we need proper numbers. Is there is a potential rebound effect? That is something we discussed yesterday. At some point, yes, we can reduce travels because we won't go to Acapulco. So yes, but yeah, in fact, you didn't have the money to go to Acapulco. So at the end of the day, you end up with people doing crazy stuff and all that, and at the end, potentially with the same financial budget, go with a much higher carbon emissions just because, hey, now we can do it, so why not? So that is something we really need to think about, and I hope we have great discussions around that. So for us, sustainability has two pillars, is plan and mutualize, and virtual production has actually great ways to work on both. The first one really is planning. What we learn, especially during the COVID crisis, and in the virtual production environment, again, it's not only about the LED walls, everything you do before that. It's when you previs stuff, you think, you work with people, you're not in a emergency mode with 50 persons waiting on a set. You have time to think about what you do and think, prepare well. And that obviously has a huge impact on the overall emissions, and that is something we need to quantify. I mean, how much more preparation days we need, find the optimum to say, okay, if it's well prepared, we will reduce that much the shooting days, and there is, I mean, at some point the line will cross. So that is something that is very interesting, but we need data to establish that. And then the other question, mutualizing the assets, that's a big one. If we manage to reuse content and not rebuild everything all the time, especially considering that there are some potential interactions with other industries, video game, maybe the building industries and architects and all that. It's a difficult topic because softwares don't work the same way. We have optimization issues and all that. I know that too well, but there are opportunities. So probably things we should think of. So the conclusion of this study, and it's VP techniques, and I'm really talking about VP techniques to separate from virtual production studio. Virtual production studio is one of the tools in the toolbox. But actually, I know, and some studios don't use any of that, any LED walls. For example, if you take The Lion King, the last with Jon Favreau, they did everything in VR before they prepared everything, and then they shot on green screen and all that, and there was no LED walls. So at some point, again, preparing stuff, communicating before is something that can work for any project. It's not only for big productions and all that. This environment, remote working before preparation, is something that works for any project. Also for some sequences and all that, because it's not the whole movie that is produced in the virtual production studio. It can really benefit and cut the emissions. It doesn't have to be large volumes. Sometimes with just a simple TV, behind a window, you can do a lot of things. So that is also something people need to integrate within their workflow. Something we need is data to actually understand and don't make bad decisions based on, we thought it was like that, but actually we don't have enough information right now to actually write the whole equation. The rebound effect is a big thing. So again, it's not good or bad by essence. It's something that works for the project or not, and both for the finance aspects and the environmental impact. So if someone asks you whether virtual production is good or bad for the environment, it's the same question as, is virtual production cheaper? It's something that was discussed yesterday. Is it cheaper? I don't know. What is your project? So it's exactly the same question. All right, so in the study, you have a lot more things about the technologies that are used and their impact and what's going to move with AI and all that. So you can download it from the Green Screen website. Again, thank you, Green Screen, for giving us the opportunity to work on this fascinating topic. It's actually something that we will continue in the future, because this is something we want to help our clients building enough knowledge and find the right solutions for their workflow. And we'll find at some point the answers to the questions. And next step is actually discuss those points. So thank you very much. Should we?
So let's let me introduce our panels. Of course, we have Cedric Lejeune, who's the CEO of Workflowers, who will be the chair. We have Michael McKenna, the CEO and co-founder of Final Pixel. Let me introduce the panels that are going to be here. It's going to be a hybrid panel, so we'll have a few online as well. Dr. Carlos Santos, R&D coordinator at Breda University. Luth Molina, who is the legal advisor and project manager at Promulaga. Stefan Gentes, Global Production Director in Worldwide at Reckitt. And then online with us today via Zoom, we have Barbara Lang, who's the Principal and CEO of Kibo 121. We have Jung-Min Kim, who is a data analyst at BAFTA Albert. Phil Holgate, who is Head of Production Sustainability at ITV Studios. And Phil Adlam, who is the Head of Research for Explore at Production Park.
All right.
And you guys are going to have to share the mic, so just pass it.
All right, yeah, we have so we don't see our people online yet. So we have a great panel today, very impressed by the number of people we have with very different backgrounds, and it's, I hope I didn't go far, too wide in the topic. So we'll try to bring it back to daily operations. But the great thing is we have people working at the topic from very different angles. So this is something that I'd like. So we good? All right. So the first question I would like to ask is, why is it important to measure the impact of virtual production? Luz? Yep.
Very classic question. Basically, because if you don't measure, you cannot improve it. Wherever it's not measured, it cannot be improved. So measurement, not only in virtual production, but in general in audiovisual industry, it's very important things, because nowadays everybody know the real impact of the industry. But a few years ago, I remember when this topic was not so trending, when we were talking about this topic, it was kind of like, well, but audiovisual industry is not that bad. We are not like, you know, that big industry, or the impact is not that terrible, but it is indeed. And now we know, because we start measuring, we start checking the process, seeing different things. And what make audiovisual industry kind of different from other industry is that when you are in a recording or shooting a movie or whenever other product from the audiovisual industry, everything needs to be up, and then it's disappear. So in a way, virtual production is changing that, but as you already mentioned, there is another things that need to be also measured. So I guess that's why it's so important that we double check if actually this is positive or not, and how we can find a balance between the two things, like real production and virtual production.
And what about the institutions? Because you present a green screen, and right now, I mean, again, we're very lucky to work on this study, but I mean, why does Europe want to know about it? I mean, how does it change the strategy? Or?
Well, specifically with virtual production, the scenario changed pretty fast because of COVID, because like suddenly out of the blue, we cannot go out, we cannot do things in public spaces, you cannot put a lot of people together, and virtual production was like escape of that and a way to keep the industry alive at that point. So I guess that because of that particular contention, we have to move forward in this topic pretty much. So in Europe, as you also mentioned before, the principal problem that we have is like the mix of electricity. It changes for each country. So it's very complicated to make like a standard calculation about the impact of virtual production from each country. And it's kind of tricky to try to standardize all around Europe. But the thing is like public institutions are working on it. And basically the way that you can convince people to do that is to link subsidies and public help. Like you measure, you control what you're doing, you control the impact that you have, and then we give you money for it. So that's basically a way.
So that is for Europe. For the US, is Barbara online? All right. Hello, Barbara. Good to see you here.
Hello. Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's all good. Thank you so much. Yeah, just the same question about the difference in on these. Is it the same in the US? Because obviously the markets are so different.
Yes, it is. Well, I would say in the United States, we're learning from what's happening in Europe and the rest of the world. We, of course, are having the same impact from the COVID and the push to remote production and the growth of virtual production, of course. But in terms of, and some of the execution, we have, launched many new screens and production studios here in the US. But from a global perspective, in terms of looking at the impact and the measurements and the sustainability aspect of the industry, it's still a bit behind what's happening in Europe, and that's mostly due to the lack of real mandates and regulations and things of that sort. So hopefully, and I expect that to change soon, that in the US we will pay closer attention in all aspects of our businesses to carbon footprint as much as we do financial budgeting and so on.
All right. And Stefan, from a more client perspective in I would say brands and things like that, I mean, is it becoming something that clients are aware in emissions and environmental impact?
Yeah, I think that sustainability is part of every brand's agenda and message, and they all have a responsibility. In terms of film and content, if you don't measure, you can't make informed decisions, right? So, and I think to answer your question, how important is it for brands? The total carbon footprint of a product from cradle to grave, marketing is only 4% of that. Just like the purchase price of your product is normally about between 4 to 5% of is marketing, and content production is only a small fraction of that 4%. However, it's iconic, it's extremely visible, and so if you're not measuring what you're doing, you don't know what you're doing, and we don't like to work on assumptions.
Talking about the benefits we've seen right now, I'd like to ask Fieldgate, the experience right now. I mean, what has been considered to be positive, and have you been able to measure that?
Hi, Cedric. Morning, everybody. Yeah, so we've tried virtual production out on a number of different use cases, and what we're seeing is, scripted content is the real obvious one. We've done some great stuff in sport as well with virtual sets and virtual studios. But where I'm getting really excited about is where we apply virtual production to dramas and other such programs as that. We've done virtual production for real on one of our big dramas called A Spy Amongst Friends. That was with Damian Lewis in it. And we managed to avoid the need to take a second unit out to the Middle East. So we managed to replicate a very specific location that was in a novel that was adapted for this show, and recreate it virtually. And that gave us our first insight into some great carbon analysis, which was absolute gold dust to me, because I had a pretty good idea that virtual production was going to have a big part to play in our decarbonisation plans. And ITV Studios, for reference, has a net zero ambition based on science-based targets to be net zero by 2030. So we need to find better and cleaner ways of producing our content whilst still entertaining our viewers as well. We then took that piece of work and that initial analysis, and then we actually visited the other Phil, who's on the call, his studios at Explore, which is just down the road from us here, and we recreated a very specific scene where we wanted to take the show and all of that content and replicate a New York skyline and at sunset as well, so capture that golden hour, which is really challenging to do on location. And we were able to take a look at the data and the carbon analysis for that as well. So whilst we can't ignore the manufacturing side of things, I'm going to park that for now, because that's very much upstream from ITV Studios' perspective, and just focus on specifically on the actual show itself and the content that we produced. And in both sets, both examples there, we showed savings of something around between 95 and 99% reduction in carbon emissions, because we had avoided that overseas travel, the airline travel. And at the minute, there's not really an indication that we're going to be able to solve that part of the TV production carbon quiz anytime soon. And so where I think it's going to be really, really suitable for is where we can avoid overseas travel and things like second units, etc. for some of our scripted shows. And the final point is where, especially where we went to Explore and did the test shoot, they're on a renewable energy tariff. They have plans, I think, to generate their own electricity on site as well. So working in tandem with the studio provider, and then obviously looking at manufacturing and things like that, I'm really hopeful that this is going to be one of the tools that we can use to achieve our net zero ambitions.
So thank you so much. Actually, it's a great transition to Phil. Adam, how do you actually measure? Where do you put the numbers in your experimental setup at Explore?
Do you mean how do we measure our carbon footprint currently?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's an ongoing journey for us, and something that we're developing continually. But we obviously monitor our consumption, but I think with the main thing that we're actually thinking about is the critical future problems. And for us, I think we're envisaging a future where we will be on a fully renewable power scenario, and I think as well from a transport perspective, I think we're electrified on our own vehicles, but we're moving towards that element for incoming productions as well. So the manufacturing aspect is actually really the key one. And I think you mentioned it earlier, at the moment there just simply aren't any studies on that at the moment. So it's genuinely quite hard for us to actually understand what the carbon impact is of manufacturing the products that we're using. So that's something that we're trying to do research in right now to understand, and hopefully we can help answer some of those questions in the future. If that answers your query.
Certainly, and actually you mentioned something very important, that you have a pretty broad scope, considering transportation, electrification of the equipment and all that. So that is also part of the project at Explore. Maybe you want to explain a little what you're doing there.
Yeah, sure. I think in many ways we're at the beginning of this journey, but like Phil, we also have ambition to be net zero for 2030, and we're looking to see if we can extend that to bringing people to our site. So we have 6 studios here, and people obviously visit us, and there's an impact in them coming here. So we're looking to see how we can either source things more locally, so we're actually expanding the site here to have more capacity on site to handle different people's requirements, so things simply don't have to travel. But also at the same time, I'm ensuring that when they come, all the resources that they need to be able to leave again, if that makes sense, to get back home, can be done in a completely zero carbon way, really. So a lot of that is to do with charging infrastructure, and there's some big challenges that with trucks in particular. So if we need to, our current power supply, for example, to our main studio is a 1000 amp 3-phase. But if we want to be able to fast charge a truck, we actually need more than that just for one truck. So the kind of power levels that we need we're talking about going 5-6 times the power requirements on our site to be able to have that kind of infrastructure, which is really, really difficult.
Sure, yeah, and it's very difficult to store electricity. We all know that.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to jump in with some of the co-benefits as well for environmental sustainability.
That's great.
It's not.
Please.
Sorry. It's not just about the carbon impact as well, especially for on-location filming. When you're filming on location, you can disturb the sort of wildlife around the area, and also diesel generators emit a lot of particulate matter as well, aside from the carbon. So yeah, I had co-benefits as well environmentally to be using VP instead of going to actual locations and maybe risking disturbing the natural wildlife and the natural landscape around the site.
And is it something, I mean, do you already collect reliable numbers? Because so you're at BAFTA as a data analyst on Albert and all that. How difficult is it to gather the information from the productions?
Yeah, we've actually started our process into working into our calculator benchmarks of VP as it becomes sort of more popular amongst productions. It's a really sort of growing industry, and we want to reflect that within our calculator. So we're starting to collect energy consumption data and hopefully use the panel size, the number of panels and the screen size to make a benchmark based on where the studio is based, and then multiply that by the emission factor for electricity, so we can start implementing that into our calculator. The one thing I did find in my research while we've been doing this is that virtual production studios are very sort of willing to give their energy consumption data. So it's actually been a really sort of smooth process so far in collecting that data. And within our sort of next iteration of the toolkit and the calculator, we hope to add that benchmark in. In terms of reliable numbers, it's really sort of hard to say because the effectiveness of virtual production really depends on a multitude of factors. So, for example, if you are a location-based drama who are filming in multiple locations and you decide to use VP, obviously the transport emissions go down significantly. But if you're sort of a solo filmmaker filming in a local park with one camera, one battery, and yeah, that's all you really need. It's going to be a lot less effective in that sense. And you're speaking about the rebound effect before in that, yeah, since it is available and since it's becoming more readily accessible, yeah, people might see that as a get out of jail free card, especially given sort of the emissions are sort of more invisible. The stat we always say at Alba is that around 50% of a production footprint is from transport. And yeah, the data storage and the energy consumption is a little bit more concealed than that, and it's a little less sort of obvious to people. So I think there's a really crucial part for education to play as well as we sort of get into this research more and it becomes more sort of used in the industry.
All right. Actually, that's something that I'd like to see with you, Michael, about the, the operations, how you can actually give information, inform your clients, and on those topics. How do you manage that in a production environment? Because we know on-set time is money. So how do you get that in your business?
I think, since we started discussing sustainability as a topic, with virtual production, which was right at the start, the ambition that Jodie and I had around VP Green and all these initiatives was to get data, because I really felt that there's a slogan you can go into a client and say, yeah, virtual production is more sustainable, but in order to actually bring that to them in a meaningful way, we needed data. So I think actually to answer your question, like this whole VP Green symposium and everything we're trying to do around it is to build that body of data so that we can be objective on that point, and it's not a sales pitch. This is actually what the research is saying, because we believe it, and we can see all the indications, from Phil at 95 to 99%, from your studies that have come out this year. The direction of travel is immense. We can see what this is telling us, and instinctively, it's heading in the right direction. I think there's also then the question is how we build on that and how we explain that further for clients in a way which allows them to grasp this like dividend element of virtual production, or that's how I like to think about it, a sustainability dividend, if you like. Which is something I know some brands are working on at the moment, is reusing those assets they create time and time again. So you may look at one production and say, okay, it's 99% more carbon, reduced carbon emissions, but also the assets that you've created in that, you may have created, a living room or some form of background content creation that can then get reused time and time again and never needs to be built again. So therefore, the next time you do it, you're actually, it's a recurring benefit that comes over long term. And I think that's what virtual production can also bring beyond just that initial saving.
All right. Carlos, on that topic, on the assets and everything, at Breda University, you have a great curriculum about video games and all that. How do you see the interaction in technologies between video games and film, and how, the technical issues, because you also have research in here. How do you think that could get benefits on the sustainability?
I think that at the moment we have a very broad academy that focuses in games and media development, so production development, and we see a lot of crossovers. Actually, that's one of the reasons why we started with virtual productions. This is exactly because of that crossover. So I imagine that we'll do more and more. So we teach our students to create new models, to reuse existing settings. They are proficient already with things like megascans, which is a great starting point to already embed that knowledge for them to be aware that can be used and reused the existing systems. I think currently the current productions are starting to becoming aware of the problems with carbon emissions and the sustainability aspects. But I think the new generation is also quite important to start almost grilling them down to explain to them that their actions, what they are developing, have consequences. They're creating content. So we are currently considering, and this is a bit of our research, first creating some data collection tools. So we're creating our own systems to do the data collections systematically in real time of what current consumption is. And then we are considering putting things like screens showcasing what they're actually using at the moment. What is their current consumption? And the fact that you have them there, they starting to be aware of that. So they're starting like, oh, the screen is on, we are consuming more. And it just becomes a more implicit way of teaching, instead of just, this is the impact. It's like becomes awareness. This is the awareness that they are becoming, and we naturally start to flowing in. Obviously, we're going to start a new program called Film and VFX. We are considering integrating themes like ethics and reusing of assets and reusing things like digital humans and the aspects, and sustainability is going to be a good chunk out of that. So we're going to be looking into that topics quite profoundly, because I think it's going to be something that is going to be really important in the future. So and it's already quite impactful, not only for marketing purposes, but also because industries are becoming more and more aware, and they would be the ones that will be the next future professionals. So the fact that we are already training them to be conscious about, at least be aware of those, is our goal.
Yeah, training is a very important parameter. And Luz, I'd like to discuss about actually how do we get not only the future professionals, but also current professionals. Are there programs at the European level to train people and to get them on board?
Yeah, actually, we were talking about that before, like how key training in this case is. Not only, like as Carlos was mentioned, like for future generation it's going to be kind of easier because they already have the mindset of sustainability being part of everything. For our current generation, it's more tricky because we have like some certain ways to do things, and changing that is kind of complicated. So, like instead, it's they create this green runner person or the eco consultant that is actually checking that everything is going according to a sustainable plan. And the problem sometimes is like that person becomes somebody that is actually looking around for mistakes, and people are like rejecting that. So it's always this way where you are making changes. You can follow like the carrot model or the stick model. And I think that trying to convince people, and the example that Carlos put, like that you are seeing visually the impact that you are having, and how you communicate the team, and how you to involve everybody to actually believe that the action that they are doing and making a difference, it's really important. And the way that you can do that is actually training people to understand how their action have consequences and how they can do it better. And that's why measurement is so important, because you can actually show them, hey, if you're doing this, this is your impact. Like, you are changing the way that you're things, you're reducing that impact, and you're helping like the planet and that in that process. And it's also important, and he mentioned like ethic, because in general, when you think on sustainability, you are only thinking on your like impact and carbon footprint or like circle assessment, as you also mentioned, but it's also the social impact. But because being sustainable is also being sustainable in an economic way, but also in a social way. Because you can have like a super ultimate virtual production study, and everything can be super sustainable for the carbon footprint way, but if the environment is super sexist or super stressful, or people are not happy on the conditions, it's also a point that you need to keep in mind. That's also a way of being sustainable. Try to take care of the people that is part of the crew.
Yeah, and you mentioned something important, that right now with the eco runner and stuff like that, we're bringing people, I would say, with an environmental knowledge into the production environment. Another take is actually more that what we're doing, and with Barbara, Barbara is the ex-director of SEMTI. There is a program for engineers. How could we get the engineers on board? You said, I mean, numbers are important for engineers, but Barbara, what do you think we should get to get the technical community on board on this sustainability topic?
Yeah, and I love this conversation because it's so real and happening. It's like we're building the airplane as we're flying, learning, what the impacts of all this new technology is, and then how to implement it. I think what Lou says is absolutely critical. Is that you cannot forget the social side and the cultural change, the mindset change that's required in order for us to achieve these targets. Organizations like SIMPTE and other industry bodies are, well, at least for SIMPTE, I can speak for SIMPTE a little bit more precisely, are looking at sustainability in a more scientific way, I guess is a good way to put it. There was recently, Cedric and I were both part of a group that looked at industry-wide white papers about the topic as it relates to, media in the cloud and the sustainability aspects of moving production, not just virtual production, but just production in general into the cloud and what that looks like. And as we learn more, then we find the gaps, and the industry can rally around and look to develop the appropriate level of best practices and standards and things of that nature. I think that's the next logical step, or in parallel to all the wonderful development that's already happening, is really gaining a better understanding of the metrics and the measurements, and so that we can all speak from the same language. And yeah, I think we're in a development phase. It's been said already, and I think that's exciting, and it creates great opportunity. And I think also with academia, this collaboration between industry and academia is critically important, because that's the next generation that is going to be employing all of these technologies and understandings, and they need to help us, the old people in this crowd, to come along, actually. So it's kind of, I think, an interesting combination of technology and society working together.
Yeah, a lot of that is happening in the cloud. Actually, Phil Adlam, how does the cloud stuff engage in the virtual production? In your experimental setup?
Yeah, I think we're, from a simple practical perspective, there's a huge amount that can be done now from a pre-visualization and pre-preparation and planning, and just simply removing site visits and all those sorts of things are some obvious wins. But then also in terms of how we're developing things on site, actually on set during the production itself, we often now have remote people come in, and remote. It's from the VAD team in particular, so they may be well be off-site and actually have live remote connections to what we're doing. And then finally, in some of the data storage sides and the more obvious traditional uses, all of those techniques are being put in place as well.
All right, Carlos, what about the way the students work now with those new technologies and everything? Do you see some changes that could be brought? Some new stuff that we don't know yet because you're a researcher, and both of you guys, do you see big changes coming?
I think that we are in a really good way in terms of providing new considerations for the industry. I think the pipeline itself is changing in industry to moving to more pre-production, and actually that avoids risk because we are much more aware of what's going to happen in the future. It's the typical fixing in post we heard yesterday.
Yeah.
It's becoming less and less common because you wanted to anticipate the risks and avoid those. And blended in that transformation, I think we have a really good opportunity now to embed the sustainability aspects into it. So I think since the industry has to adapt, it literally has to adapt because it's going to become more focused on pre-visualization, more focused on communication, avoid risks, I think is a good place for us to embed the discussion in terms of sustainability. So this is the link I'm trying to work out. And for example, on the previs production documents that we have to consider, like pre-visualization, pre-production, storyboarding, breakdown, stuff like that, we can already start considering those. Like on on a creative point of view, how can we avoid maybe specific shots, or we consider other shots because they're more sustainable in some way, telling the same stories, telling the same narrative. So I think that's a way that conceptually can be transferred to the industry, I imagine. So that's some angles that I would like to explore as research. And the other one is the way that you could mentally or starting more naturally people be aware of what they are doing and what are the consequences they have. So those are the two angles that we as university and researchers want to explore next. We also quite new in this field, but that's something that I would be interesting more and more explore. And I would like to obviously invite other companies and their policy. We're already working with Final Pixel, but we would be open to working more in that area in the future.
Yesterday there was a great presentation about Previs, and the company, I think people can watch it online because it will be there. They're presenting that tool of budgeting the setup. Can we imagine in the future having the carbon footprint at the same time as these?
I imagine so. I imagine we can have at least a good estimation of it in terms of what will be the cost, but also have a bit of an idea how much we'll take in terms of footprint. We will have aware of how many people will be on stage. We'll have aware of how many will be having shooting days. So all of those things, we can already have an idea of what the impact will be. So it might not be 100% reliable, especially in the beginning, but I imagine that with time, with more data, with more analysis, it'll get better and better. That's my expectation.
All right.
There is...
sorry. Go on. Yes, Rick?
Yeah. So I was just going to say that there's another technology change that we've seen happening in terms of bandwidth availability and the reduction in latency as well. And we are now approaching points where the compute of the VP stage can actually be done fully remotely as well, and all the real-time rendering. And I think that is also is leading the way and opening doors to a lot more processes being taken to the cloud. And you end up with significant efficiency because of that. So it's just there's a genuine technology sort of threshold I think that we've reached. It's just important to note.
Phil Gate, I have a question about the decision process. I mean, as we mentioned, a lot of the production effort moves to pre-production. In your environment, I mean, your Interlar client at ITV Studios, how do they get that? Because it's also very difficult, and that's something I ask you as well at some point. It's very difficult to invest money until you actually see something. Does the Previs help in that? I mean, how do you sell that to your client?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying that this is still very new to ITV Studios and to the whole industry. If we're being honest, I think everyone's quite early on in their journey, but you can see the obvious benefits of being able to pre-visualize something and make some of those key sort of creative decisions or production management decisions before you've even really got a whole production team on board. You can iron out a lot of those challenges, and so to shift the decision-making process way before anything, you even start rolling on a camera, has got so many benefits. So I can see how it's going to be massively impactful and influential to people. And you're not having to almost chase your own tail in post-production, especially when you've got deadlines looming, which hopefully will de-stress the entire TV industry, which is not a bad additional benefit either. But yeah, there's real obvious benefits to being able to previs what you're doing and blocking it all out ahead of time.
Yeah, there was a very interesting point yesterday about an animator telling that we make the decision downstream because it's a way we already have stuff and we can refine. And then again, as you mentioned, people and especially clients, brands, they want to see what they will get. So that's a balance to find between pre and post. How do you see that? I mean, especially in the context of advertisement, where the stress is not put, and the timing is different, the stress is not the same. How do you see that in that environment?
Well, I'm glad we're talking about production now, because that's really my area of expertise. And the interesting thing about working on the brand is you're completely upstream in the process. So this is the place where we have the greatest levers to, impact the whole entire production process. And I think when we're talking about production process, we're talking about behavior change. We saw some really great presentations yesterday. This is like the third way of filming, right? After film, video, and this is like the third way of filming virtual production. And it's this behavior change that is so difficult. It's hard to imagine that only a few years ago it was perfectly okay still to smoke in an airplane, or to go around without wearing seatbelts. And today it's absolutely impossible to imagine that that's still okay. And I think in 10 years' time, the idea that we go to a remote location, take incredible, talented people from all over the world, fly them there, set up a high-tech workbench to make a one-off product, on that one single workbench, and then dismantle everything, feed all the people, overnight them, and then dismantle that thing, and then take it apart, and do that 300 times a year. Our kids are going to think we're crazy. So I think being at a brand and being a production expert, we can look at what happened in COVID. We saw this emerging technology, and we said, you know what? Instead of going into location, we can bring the location to one place. And all of a sudden we can combine things, and the synergies that come out of that are, we've prototyped here with the guys in the room, dozens of projects last year, and we're measuring 75% less carbon. Beyond the incredible synergies of, having all the creative capabilities of the virtual studios on the upside in there, as well as, you were talking about a safe environment. People, they're going somewhere at 8 a.m., and they're working regular working days over months. So, so from so many different aspects, this incredibly modern way of working is really exciting, and it's great to be here because I'm really here to learn, and there's so many wonderful ideas around here, and I think the science of looking at how this is going to impact what we're doing is incredibly powerful, because as a marketer we're facing the challenge. I think it's something Michael talked about, lowering budgets. No, we're spending the same, but we just have to reach incredible amount more of touch points, with different content in real time. So huge challenges.
Yeah. Michael, actually, that's a good point, because you have facilities in different places in the world. How do you see the potential interaction, for example, in the context of production that needs to use different resources and all that?
I mean, naturally we use artists all over the world, in that remote workflow, moving away from on-set production, though, the pre-production work that goes into the virtual art department can happen, at people's homes. People don't have to go to physical locations, so you're cutting out on the daily travel, you're cutting out on the overheads of an office, all these sorts of things. So that brings sustainability benefits. It also obviously brings, way of life benefits for some of those artists, I would hope. And I think that's just one natural factor that we've embraced with virtual production from the start. I think, what happens next is, how do these facilities, how does our, anchor into different areas where we're doing virtual production, sync up more, and maybe what Phil is saying around the cloud and how we use the cloud to drive production. Maybe there's something in that. I think more likely what we'll just see is the ability to address the needs of our clients in much better ways. So where we have clients in advertising in particular who want to maybe shoot a similar advert in different locations but with different cast, we can now take the same assets and then place them in different facilities with different cast members, and so be able to effectively, address those different markets. And the more that we're able to do that smoothly and efficiently in a kind of very end-to-end production way, I think we'll meet the needs of our clients and help them meet their goals, again, around sustainability.
All right, and yesterday there was a talk about AI. How do you see the impact of that in this environment?
I mean, again, the asset creation's an area that we're really focusing on, or we're following closely. You know, we're interested to see how that develops. How it impacts on-set virtual production. I mean, every day I hear about a new use case for AI. So, I mean, I think in some ways we're just going to kind of wait and see how that develops. What's really fundamental for us is that, you know, production can be a very risky process, and so we have to make sure we de-risk that process as much as possible throughout, especially when using new technology like virtual production. So anytime we look to implement new technology, it has to be we feel like it has to be production ready. I can't say that I've seen that many AI tools yet that I would say are like production ready that I'd be happy to throw into like a large shoot for a client yet, but I think, you know, that we might see more coming. Clearly the potential is there, but yeah, certainly asset creation, background, you know, virtual environments, we can see that's coming now. I'm sure there'll be, you know, a whole load of changes to potential like script writing, how people approach writing scripts from the start, concepting, these sorts of areas. But like I say, we kind of have to see how that pans out. I think we'll see a lot this year.
We actually actively do research in AI here as well for generation, and we can see that AI is going to be impactful in the sense that it's going to be supporting the development. I don't think it's going to be able to just create the final thing and be able to describe, hey, I want to have a jungle scene now, and it'll just generate that for us. Maybe in 10 years, but I don't think that will happen soon. Not as being production ready, but it will be a very good supportive tool, which again, I think will reduce and increase efficiency. Has social impacts, ethical impacts that we are also addressing and in consideration. But we also have to consider that even virtual productions is very infant technology. I think with time and with us working on it more and more, and companies like Epic, it was presenting yesterday as well, we'll get better, we'll get more efficient, and becoming more efficient also means more sustainable. So I think this is, although we might not be monetarily sufficient or equivalent yet, because it has a lot of expenses setting up the LED volume, I think with the creation of LED volumes around the world, with proliferation of studios that have that knowledge, with the development of the tools, it will become increasingly more efficient and more sustainable because of it. That's my belief.
Well, actually, something that I mean, from the especially the interviews I had, something I'm a bit afraid of is the rebound effect. And I would like to ask Jung about the potentially how can we measure that? I mean, because potentially people doing stuff all over the place, and because, as you said, it's monetary efficient, so maybe you can do more. So how do we manage that? I mean, is that something we can put in numbers? Do you think so?
Yeah, so prior to this call, I actually did a bit of research on what the sort of main emitters of virtual production are, and the main one is the power consumption by powering the LED walls, the rendering equipment, etc. So while we're collecting this data, we're making sure that it's a virtual production studio specific benchmark to really illuminate the higher energy consumption. And I think one of the outputs of our research at Albert is going to be doing a decision chart and sort of advising production on whether they should use virtual production in the context of what they're trying to do on production. So it could look like, oh, are you going to travel to multiple places in multiple different areas? If so, consider virtual production. Something like that, a decision chart to really guide productions into how it's more sustainable and how it can be used most effectively. And I think as production workflows for virtual production become more efficient and streamlined, and productions become more comfortable with using the technology, I think the energy consumption has potential to decrease a little whilst we're in this learning stage. And yeah, as we get more data, we can start to look at the pinch points, and we can start looking into sort of solutions to make virtual production even more environmentally sustainable. So I think the idea of sharing digital assets that are common within different shows, such as, you know, the Statue of Liberty or the Eiffel Tower, you speaking earlier, Cedric, would be a great way to sort of cut that carbon cost of that particular process. And I'm sure as the data comes in, we'll be able to see where those pinch points are in terms of carbon emissions, and we'll be able to look at sort of solutions towards it. In terms of virtual production studios themselves, at Albert, we have something called the Studio Sustainability Standard, and it really drives this healthy competition between the studios to sort of become more environmentally sustainable as they get assorted a sustainability score at the end. And stuff like that can really sort of help the virtual production industry in particular become sort of more sustainable in the future. Yeah.
Okay, so at some point means that we need to set some targets.
Yeah. I think, the crucial thing about the data coming in now is that we can use this data in our Albert's benchmarks to sort of create a baseline emissions, and then we can go from there. We can create the emissions targets for VP in the future.
All right. Phil Holgate, you mentioned the SBTI. I think ITV Studios is involved and committed to the science-based target. Is that something that is already, driving some decisions and for example, say, okay, we will change this and that to match our strategy?
Yeah, it is, and having really good quality data from lots of different sources, including Albert, is a massive part of that. I think we've touched on it a few times. You need that benchmark. You need to be able to track and measure your progress just to understand where you're heading, but then also being able to predict ahead and figure out through various what-if scenarios. If we carry on down this route, what's going to happen if we adopt this new technology or that innovation? What does that mean for our ability to meet our targets as well? So, and having a framework like SBTI and others to follow is really, really helpful, because it just keeps you on the right trajectory and allows you to make those really significant key decisions. And as a commercial business, like most businesses are, that's going to be super important as, climate. The requirement to meet climate targets is going to ramp up. It's only heading in one direction, thankfully. And so, it's super useful to have that kind of North Star to follow, and backed up by really good quality data and access to data. And also this is really the key theme that's been rippling through this morning's panel discussion, that you don't accidentally make the wrong decisions for the right reasons as well. So that, the clarity that we're starting to get, and the spirit of collaboration as well, as we're all working to, sometimes to different benchmarks and different, frameworks, but essentially all trying to get to the same end point. So yeah, it's exciting times. I never envisaged we'd have this conversation even a couple of years ago. So, it's a fast evolving, conversation, and at times it's hard to keep ahead of it.
Sure. Sorry. Please.
Just to add on to that point, the quality data is super important for sort of behavior change in itself, because once we do add that benchmark into the calculator, people can go in and see the difference in emissions between if we use a flight or if we travel to Scotland, for example, versus the virtual production benchmark. So the quality data also acts as a sort of tool for behavior change as well. And I think that's really important too.
Yeah. Luz, we are talking about, I would say, at the private level, but at the institutional level, like Europe, how do you see things like targets and things? How do you manage that with such a level of complexity?
It's actually like a really good question, and also related with the data collection. It's also important to not lose the sense of measurement, because sometimes for the industry, if you ask them too many things, or too deep information, they get kind of lost. So what we cannot pretend is that everybody can afford to have like a sustainability expert on set. So we should find a way to actually decide which is the key information that you need to collect. Because otherwise you are making the task too academic or too technical, and people get somehow like they reject the idea of like, I don't want to make this extra task of collecting that amount of information. So you don't need to know everything. You only need to be focused on the key things that are going to make your production better or not. And we already know more or less what is that. And what is actually positive from virtual productions is that it's like a place that is settled down. So the process are going somehow to repeat, so you are able to predict better what is going to be in one way or other. It's the same that all times with green screen on studies, it's easier to understand your impact because the process are somehow repeating. So it's like a way to make things easier also for the industry, which is again very important because this cannot be an extra task for them because there's already a lot of things going on. And related with the standardization through Europe and how can you say like, boom, put a stamp and this is a green production. It's kind of complicated, especially because there is still not like a instrument that can be used all around Europe. We try with Eureka, with the calculator that we developed inside of a green screen, and we keep working on it because there's still some lagging information, for example, with virtual productions and some other new technologies. And because it's important, especially for co-production, for international co-production, where they're shooting in different places, that they don't have to use different instruments. And also from the European institution perspective, they need to be able to understand what is the level to decide this is green or sustainable and this is not. So we're still lagging on that. I think that that we are on the way to find a solution, and obviously, like a European Commission, they are working on some certain like standard database and some certain plugin that you can use in the different calculators that are already on the market. Because which is also like not fair is that, for example, Germany, they have their own calculator, and they say like this is compulsory by law to use in Germany, so we cannot force them to use something else. So you need to find a balance to not make the topic something like, not easy to follow or to accomplish. So, yeah.
Yeah, a bit of a challenge. And certainly the open source initiative to make sure that we share, that stuff gets at least comparable between different tools, that's certainly a big topic. Yeah.
Again, institutions also need to be sustainable on that, because if we are deciding now, we're going to create the wheel, we are starting from scratch, not taking in consideration of the work that already have been done, it's kind of silly.
Yeah.
So.
Great. Do we have questions from the local attendants or on the web? Yes? Sorry, I should. Thank you, Jody. Okay, all right. So that'll be.
I'll try and be quick. I do actually have a few points. Just one thing is that we provide LED volumes, and we're a relatively new company, 6 years old. But all our distros have got great monitoring on it, and that's why we spent a lot of extra money on that to make sure we had that from the beginning. And it's something that everyone in production could log into, and they can kind of be aware of it. One thing that's really happening at the moment is virtual production's going darker, as in less brightness, and obviously, we're making lovely new panels, but one of the things that's happening with the Brompton processing, there are changes in the processors. Even 10-year-old processors can do the same stuff. And with their, sorry to get technical, extended bit depth, it means you can run the screens darker. They're actually consuming a lot less power than they were. So it's something that we need to be aware of, that actually the measurements we had before are already changing quite a lot. So LED volumes really aren't having so much of an impact. Smaller screens, that's becoming much more of a bigger thing. It's not always about giant volumes. The Opera House in London, when you want to be a production, you tender for how much electricity you're going to use. And if you use more than that, you're charged on it. So it would be a thing where people, instead of saying, hey, we're really green, it's like, how much electricity are you proposing to use? And it's something that then is on everyone to kind of measure and take note of. Sorry, a couple of more things quickly. Batteries, actually, surprisingly, there are now large format batteries that you can use, and you could do a pop-up driving plate in a warehouse somewhere. Batteries, the same thing with the trucks. Bizarrely enough, they now use batteries to charge batteries. So you can charge it, on a lower rate. And then when you've got the truck pull up, you can then pull it off this battery rather than having extra supply from power substations.
So I propose to have you on the panel next year.
Okay.
Because we need to stay in time. Do you have a question for our panelists?
Well, the last thing I was going to say about sustainability officers, you can't afford to not have a sustainability officer. So,
but do you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay.
Just points I wanted to bring up.
We
as
have a
things.
question over there.
My name is Oliver Sperber from Ru LED manufacturer. It's not a advertisement question. I just have for the creative side. We have a kind of problem when it comes to colors. For example, people want to have the color grading, and they're using the LED wall to 100% because the processor will get them most out of it. So how are you guys teaching those creatives to come up with new ideas? We know for us it's very simple. We sell the idea. Yes, you have to run the LED wall on 100% to get the best color spectrum out of it and everything else. So it's more the handling of things. Do you have any kind of programs for that? So any alternatives?
I mean, yeah, I think I guess we don't actively encourage people to turn down the wall for that reason at the moment. We actually find people have the wall anywhere between 30 and 60% on a shoot. I think that's usually because currently still in virtual production, as Sam mentioned the other day, the colour side of it is probably still in the final 10% of things that we're all trying to do really well and get it very accurate and get it perfected. So I think the main, a lot of shoots are working around the DOP's vision and the DOP's, how he or she can light effectively, and often that's where the first consideration comes from in terms of the screen brightness. But yeah, absolutely, I think as we continue to try and perfect the colour output, yeah, it probably will put pressure on that percentage. However, there was a great panel last year at VP Green, which included David from ARRI in London, David Levy, and he was explaining the monitoring software and the monitoring tools that they have in the stage at ARRI, and I think this is where potentially the answer is that we've got much more active monitoring of these stages so that the power usage can actually be controlled, automated throughout the day. So when you've got periods where you can have downtime, or periods where the screen, doesn't need to be run at whatever percentage it's been set at for creative decisions, then we can mitigate that throughout the day or at other times. So I think active monitoring could be part of the answer there to still combine with the sort of best quality output. And I think just to say it's really great that RU are here today because as Cedric mentioned at the start, the manufacturer side is still, unclear to many of us in this measurement. And I think that it would be great to have more manufacturers involved in this program with VP Green, because it's clearly an area that is the next bit to tackle, almost beyond the production side.
Yeah. Can I jump in with a small comment on this?
Sure.
Just to say, it's interesting that you're here, but I'm actually working with Tim from Row at the moment on some of these challenges as well. But we perhaps need to join some more dots together. Another consideration in this as well is the HDR workflows, because often people want to have a screen that can be capable of being very bright, but the vast majority of the screen is actually dark most of the time. So that the localized brightness, if you like, is actually a key thing. So I'm envisaging screens being capable of being much, much brighter than they are now in the future, but the actual energy consumption is dropping at the same time.
Well, I think we're good for the timing and everything. Thank you so much for bringing this question, because that bridges the two parts of my careers between color science and sustainability, and I never thought I would ever manage to do that. Thank you so much for this amazing panel. That was a speedy conversation. I think we could have that for 3 hours, but now we will move to the design session on what we really want to achieve. So thank you again to you all. We'll have a small break to rearrange for the next session.
Welcome back. So we're now going to do our co-design session. For those of you who are on our live stream, you need to refresh your page because we now have the chat option available, so that if you have questions that you want to bring about during the co-design session, then we'll be able to address those while we go. So for those of you who also are going to collaborate with us on this section, the Miro board share link is here. You just need to click on the link, and it takes you into the Miro board, where I will then show you a quick onboarding session, how it works. If you've never used or been in Miro before, it will be really, really easy. Okay, so let me just switch my screen. Okay, good. We have a couple people in. It's great. So this is a Miro board, and it's a whiteboard that allows us to engage and implement different information together. And the idea is that I might need you to hold my mic while I move the thing. Sorry.
Yeah, sure, no worries.
Okay. Cedric and I will talk you through this process. It's a bit fiddly sometimes. Let's see, I just moved. I can't do it. There we go.
Do you mind if we just swap?
Yeah, because I can't use on this.
Let's do that. Take this one.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, that would be a much better workflow. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay. So just quickly, this board here, hopefully, that I will be able to manipulate on this new laptop, was the findings from the co-design session that we did last year. And basically, the key 3 points was that sustainability needs to be embedded in knowledge and education, that new business opportunities from B2B, what's the sustainability angle, and then also the need for more information and more data to make sustainable decisions. And I can't open this. There we go. There we go. Thank you. So these were the findings from last year. So you can read over those at your leisure. We're going to keep this Miro board open for a week post the event today, so that you'll have time to go in and impact the findings with data. And basically what you need to do is this little box here provides a sticky note. You can choose a color, and then you can put it anywhere on the Miro board that you want to. So the first sort of task here is this box. And for those of you who are in the space, it'd be great just to drop a box and type in your findings. So in this particular section, we are looking for information that is relevant to resources, links, reports, or PDFs, any information that you have that gives us a really good baseline before we start to answer some of the questions on the rest of the profile. So we'll give you a few minutes to kind of familiarize yourself, start dropping in some post-it notes, and put in some resources of materials, things that you have in your own toolbox.
Yeah, because it's something that actually during the research, it's a moving target. What's happening right now with carbon calculation in the media environment, obviously all the new technologies coming and all that. It's and if you want to have that kind of information, actually sometimes it's a bit challenging too, because you have initiatives in different countries, so language can be an issue as well. I mean, you really want to mutualize that kind of information, so then we can build up the knowledge together. Yeah.
Okay, and then obviously it's really important to try not to move any of the main boxes, which I realize are quite difficult to do sometimes.
Yeah, it's a giant Pac-Man.
Yeah,
game.
exactly. The first 3 questions, I'm going to have to just use this plus sign because there we go. The first section here is really just some primary information about your profile. So in frame 1 is just what industry do you work in. Number 2 is your job mostly, and then here's some examples of what your job role may be. So it'd be great for you just to populate what your specific job role is. And then have you attended any eco productions and sustainability training? And it's just sort of a yes or no. And again, this is just to give us a little bit of a baseline. So if you could just take a moment to fill that information out as well, just drop in a post-it note. Again, this industry here, these are just a couple of markers, but obviously you might work from lots of different industries as well.
Yeah, actually what is interesting that is that it gives a platform for the discussion. In the preparation, we had sent an online survey for projects. We didn't have many answers, but that survey is still online. So following up to this session, you could continue getting in this online survey. So maybe we would copy and paste the link for that. Mm-hmm. Because obviously our business is all about prototypes, diversity, everything is different. So it's very difficult to gather a set of data that is significant. The more data we have, then we can structure it and then start to analyze. But right now, actually, that's really the challenge and the purpose of this session.
Yep, great. And thank you, Alice, for dropping my green box down again so that everything looks nice and pretty. Okay. So so whilst you guys are populating that first sort of basic profile, we have 3 key sections that again mimic the survey, the pre-event survey that we will follow up post-event and send again. In these sections, we are going to look at your projects that you did in 2022, and I'm just going to go through quickly just to say what these are, and then you can explain a little bit further. So in this box, it is how many of your projects have used VP technologies, and again, they could be any number. I just put in a couple of post-it notes. It really is quite simple just to tell us a number of projects you did that had used VP technologies in 2022. In this yellow box, how did you learn to work with VP technology? And again, these are just some examples of different touch points. You were self-taught, or you had some educational trainings, or some online, or maybe you work in the sector and you led some of those discussions as well. The next question is, what share of production types where VP was involved on your 2022 projects? And the choices are cinema, TV series, documentary, advertising, broadcast, and university training. And the idea for this box is to drop down a percentage. And it's the same for the next question as well. Share of productions where a following of VP techniques were involved. And that is remote production, technical previs, production previs, motion capture, and 3D scanning. And then I'll do these quickly. We'll go back to the top. Content displayed on an LED wall. Again, a percentage. So you've got real-time 3D, pre-calculated 3D, stock shots, 2D, reduced. Sorry, I can't see that. Reduced.
Produced 2D. In the sense
yeah,
that,
there we go. Thank you. AI generated.
Yeah.
And then
not on the stock shot, but something you build purposely.
And then the share of your projects where digital assets were reused. This should just be in a percentage. And if applicable, what are the sources of the assets reused? And there's just some examples. So in this is the second tier of questions. And Cedric, I'll let you go ahead and kind of elaborate on some of those key points.
Sure. Well, this is something that, especially the learning stuff, obviously a lot of us have learned about virtual production during the COVID because we had a lot of time to do so. and so getting the industry was very good at providing good training resources to get our hands on the technology. But what is actually the most challenging part is to connect the knowledge and not only the different types of knowledge, to organize a virtual production, but also something where you need to make sure you build a common ground with the people. Actually, there's on the VP Gathering website, there are some sample documents that I think are very good to actually help structure all that. So And as we discussed in the panel earlier, we need to find ways to get the industry on board. And right now, in a curriculum such as the one in here, we have future professionals that will have a very good grasp on the technologies involved, but there's also a challenge on how we bring current technicians and professionals to get to know enough, because there's also a risk, and we've seen some experience that it will be interesting to actually get your feedback on that. People jumping in, we are in experimentation mode and try things and fail, and that might give a bad name sometimes to virtual production, just because people don't assume it's an experimental mode. So all kind of stuff that we need to bring up the knowledge we get there. So yeah, sharing your experience would be really, really interesting for us. Then on the
sorry.
No worries.
Where are we?
The share of production.
Which one?
The gray one, this one.
The gray one?
Yeah. Yeah, that is something, as we discussed in the panel, the impact of virtual production is actually quite different if you're working on commercials, if you're working on TV series, if you're working on high-end projects, low-end projects, and also what in the interviews during the study, and also discussing with in the industry, it looks like virtual production in its current state, because it's probably something that will evolve in the future, is easier to implement and I would say more acceptable. So that's maybe something you, Stefan, with the production environment, and especially when you go to the agencies and all that, finding the right balance between the excitement of new toys, but also find the efficiency and the games of power in the decision making and all that, making sure that people can adapt the way they work, they think, they make decisions to this new paradigm. That is quite interesting. And also, if you can put in the comments what you think works and what doesn't for typical, I mean, as I said, advertisement is very different from cinema. It's very different from daily shows and stuff like that. So it will be very interesting to see where we're at and what is the maturity of those different markets for virtual production adoption.
I think it's also worth noting that these questions where percentages are aligned with these different capacities might take some research time for you to go back and dig up those numbers. So that's why we're going to leave this open to populate it, as well as resend the survey post-event, because I think these numbers are really important with looking at doing a benchmark study, aligning a lot of the studies that are coming around from various different vantage points to try and align. So don't worry if you can't come up with these numbers today. It's really just an introduction to what what the survey is looking for in a visualized, engaging way. So shall we move on to the next?
Yeah, the content displayed on the background content, that's something that is, as we saw earlier, it's something that actually it's a production inside a production. So technically, this has a big impact, and I mean, you could have, yourself alone in front of Star Wars. That would be a huge impact in the production. So then it's about finding how content is produced, and also see. I mean, if we see in the future, because the goal of this exercise is actually to see the evolution, as we discussed earlier, and we are still in an infancy stage of this. New technologies are coming, people are becoming more aware. Obviously, they know better how to integrate new stuff, and they know what works, what doesn't. Obviously, I mean, if you need to fix stuff in post-production, for example, you went for an easy background, 2D background, but you have to roto and redo it in post. That's not fun. Maybe it would be more interesting to actually think about it and prepare something more advanced in a pre-production. So that's kind of stuff we would like to be able to see the trends on this see how, for example, if AI at some point brings some changes, if we see a move from 2D to 3D, I think that is something that will be quite interesting in the progress of this study exercise.
Okay, shall we move to the second layer?
Yeah.
So this looks at focusing on key 2022 VP projects of your choice. And there's a couple of questions here. I will go through each of them. So these four purple boxes we're looking at project characteristics. So number of shooting days, what were the percentage of VP shooting days, was the project designed specifically for VP, and where the environmental considerations for VP, were there environmental considerations for using VP in production? And again, these are just some example answers that you can give on these four key questions. Then, if the project is considered the use of VP for environmental reasons, what was the main driver for it? And again, these are your categories or your different choices. If you have additional information or additional comments, please make sure you put that on a note. Did you use remote production? Yes or no? This is for staff members working live on VP productions remotely. Might be useful if they say no. Why?
Yes.
Why not?
Exactly.
VP project infrastructure, a location. In which country was the VP studio located? Again, we can see the UK is there. Infrastructure type, what was the LED volume size? So we had the small, medium, and large, and you talked about this on your keynote as well as the different sizes of the stage. Maybe you can talk about that a bit more. And then what was the type of studio?
Yeah, this is something, a trend that we see as well. Actually, in the study, we found that really have larger stages that are permanent setups, and then we have actually people who don't even own LED panels, and they actually work with the production and see what they actually need, and they build up a setup in the studio in general, in a studio where they shoot in different stages. And so they come as close as possible to the production. So it's two different approaches. Right now, it's actually, from a business point of view and monetary point of view, it makes sense to have those two things. On one side, you bring the production to your place, and you have enough stages and everything to get the whole project. On the other side, you actually follow the project. Which one is the best? Actually, that's the kind of information we would like to extract from this data.
I think it's really interesting too. I was speaking to a head of sustainability officer who has worked in this space for about 17 years, and I asked him, when it comes to creativity and sustainability, which one usually wins? And he said it's usually creativity. So I think it was really interesting what Luth was saying, that having these standardized, that's not just a branding exercise or a marketing where you get a nice shiny badge, but actually some sort of implication. You actually said it, we were about the opera, right? The opera house. So there's some sort of, not a penalty, I suppose, but there is some sort of cost by not going a more sustainable route in your production. And I guess that's kind of what we're looking at, these research. So, because my question is, who's going to be the driver or the responsible? Is it the big, large companies in the industry that are going to drive it for everybody else? Or is it the smaller companies are doing a lot of their own work and have their own benchmark studies, but it's not sort of unified? And it's not necessarily to deem it down from the top down, or have maybe policy implications, but maybe there, again, it hits at the bottom line where it's most important.
It wasn't that you had to have the lowest level, it's just that you had to be honest when you were tendering for it to say, this is what we're going to use, and that's part of it. It's like, that was the thing. It's like, if you're going to give us a number, it's got to be a real number. Don't just make it up.
Right. And isn't that one of the calculators in Europe? We've had this conversation before, I don't know which one it was, but they tie the sustainability to the budget, like the budget line items in the calculator.
Well, that's a bit of that's a big question, because ultimately, at the production level, the overall budget, in fact, you want to relate the overall emissions with the overall budget. But it doesn't mean anything. I mean, what is important in a movie is that sequence, how it's produced, and then who are the people working on it, and how would they change their way of doing things. If it's the catering, that may be maybe on just one sequence, if the guys doing set construction and all that. So we have to get that deep. And so right now, we're talking about virtual production and the digital aspects and production aspects for that. But it's also a discussion on the sustainability thing that actually connects with all those things: transportation, catering, set construction, all those things. We need to find ways, and that's where the challenge is what do you compare? Because you may have, for example, a car chase that could be in a $20 million movie and a $1 million movie. The question is it more than to the story? And then it brings it back to what you said earlier, is that how do we get people to get involved? It's not about the genre. It's really about where you want to put your money and where you want to put the carbon. So that's not.
And ideally, these calculators are there so that you can measure it instead of just taking a wild guess of which creative direction will make a better impact. Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to say about any of these other boards before we move on?
Well, something interesting about the implementation of VP, the question of the main driver. Some people, obviously, a lot of people are excited because it's new, it's a new toy and everything, and we all want to play with new things. At some point in the future, maybe we will see people going VP for sustainability reasons or for other reasons, budget reasons. I think that would be quite interesting to, again, see how this moves in time.
I think that was one of the questions that came up yesterday during one of the presentations was, why did you use a robotic arm versus flipping the virtual environment? So I mean, that's a probably good example of that. Okay.
And obviously the country, as we discussed earlier, they, in fact, that is something that is right now a bit difficult in the sense that until you have your own electricity production, and then you can really say, this is my energy, so this is my carbon emissions from my own energy. Otherwise, you always pick the electricity from the grid. So in that case, the calculation of the footprint of your electricity should be taken from the grid, and then you say, I compensate, I contribute, because we don't say compensate anymore with the new regulations, I contribute by the difference between what my green provider gives me as a number and the number from the grid. So, I mean, all the calculation of the electricity impact is something that we need to be careful of. But in any case, because, I mean, green energy, zero emission energy doesn't exist. And electricity is, obviously, it's not energy, it's a mean of transportation of energy. So at some point, this is also something where we need to find in the equation, and I did show in the study that the impact is actually quite big, to see at some point find the right tools, and I expect that this work group at some point will find ways to build tools that help people make decisions. Obviously, yesterday we discussed about tools for the budget, but also tools for the carbon, and say, okay, guys, it makes more sense because you're there, and even though the electricity mix has a lot of carbon, you will save so much on transportation that it definitely makes sense to shoot there. You know, there's no question, because as Phil mentioned, you may cut 95% of the emissions on transportation. So that makes a lot of sense. But for that, you need to really understand how your production works.
And does each country or region that has maybe different energy consumption or different energy supply would have to have their own calculation, or is it one calculation for all productions anywhere in the world?
In fact, you have every region, actually, even, for example, the BBC has a nice program called Carbon Aware Computing, because it's something that changed with the hours. So, for example, when I started my presentation, I was showing and encourage you guys to take a look at the Electricity Maps website, where you see in real time, it's updated every half hour, I think, what is the electricity mix of your country, and then you know exactly what carbon you get. And for example, the BBC has this R&D program where, based on the weather expectations, I say, okay, those not time critical tasks, for example, conversion of compression of files and stuff like that, I will launch the processing when I have wind, because then I will emit less carbon than if I do it overnight, and there is no, that's the kind of stuff. At some point, we can get smart with that kind of information. So every country has an average over the year. So right now, that is what we use. And for example, in the carbon calculators, such as Albert, or in France, we have EcoProd and Seco2. We choose the country and it updates, for example, for the post-production. 1 day of post-production in France, in Spain, or in Netherlands, the same day with the same setup will have a different impact.
Okay.
But then that is, I would say, the overall. Right now, we in those tools, because they are, I would say, awareness tools, we keep it at the yearly level. But for people, and some of our clients are really getting into that direction, they really want to change things, and so we go for something that is much more precise and say, okay, on this setup, you can get electricity from your own production, stuff like that. So you should move your calculation there, and the same. So because at some point it's also decision you need to make on a building. For example, if you want to get solar panels and stuff like that, I mean, you have to balance between the carbon impact and obviously the cost of the setup. So that's all calculations that need to be made. Yeah.
Okay, good. So the second part of this is about the energy. So the questions are: what was the energy consumption measured? Are you interested in a Are you interested in a tool that facilitates measuring energy consumption? Do you have any interest in a tool that tracks production carbon emission? Was the energy source renewable? And then this is estimates of global energy consumption for the project if known. So this is your energy consumptions measured on project duration. So can energy consumption be split? And it has some examples: IT, LED wall, cooling, and heating. Again, these are yes/no questions, but I realize there's a lot of deep thinking. Estimated electricity consumption, your global electricity consumption estimation in kilowatts on project per hour on project duration. So you've got your IT, your LED wall, your cooling, and your electrical. And again, we're just looking at, measurements. You're going to have to go look at your measurements, if any. And then estimated gas fuel consumption, global gas fuel consumption estimates on M3. What does that stand for? Project duration.
Cube meters. That's the volume that is consumed.
Okay.
Because obviously energy being for transportation or for running the equipment, but also the infrastructure, because you need electricity for the air conditioning, you need electricity for the heating. So at some point, again, right now we are in awareness mode, so we keep the values at the yearly level, but at some point, once we know better, so for example, we have clients who have smart building information, so they see, they actually may have that in this building, where you see the temperature, the exterior temperature, and the electricity consumption for heating and cooling. At some point, you may even decide when you do things like, plan to optimize based on the electricity and all that. And something also very important, because this has an impact, a larger impact for the infrastructure for studios, insulation. One of the biggest problems we have in our infrastructure is that most of the studios are not well insulated. And the cost of insulating such large volumes is pretty high. So at some point, finding the right equation to say, okay, it makes sense to knock out this place and build a new one with the new standards, or make some work to make it better and all that. That's the kind of calculation we need to make, because this has a very big impact. And on the air conditioning itself, it's not so much the electricity that is consumed that has the carbon emissions. It's really about the gas, the refrigerant gas we use. Every kilogram of gas you put in the air conditioning system, it's several tons of CO2 equivalent. So that's the kind of stuff that if you can manage to reduce the air conditioning, so if you manage well, for example, the machine room size and the way it's cooled, maybe with free cooling in some, it's technically possible in some situation, then you have a huge impact for your infrastructure.
Okay. I think we're almost out of time, but I think I want to just wrap up with the findings that we found from last year, and also on the panel today we talked about yesterday was embedding a lot of this knowledge and education, new business opportunities, these new tools and technologies that are changing every 6 months, that it's important to start attaching sustainability at the, I think Stefan was saying, even at the very beginning stages of that production planning. And then as these calculators and more data comes on board, we'll have more tools to be able to utilize, and I imagine more tool sets will be developed to be able to use those just alongside production. I think it's also worth noting that a lot of people that signed up for the VP Green event this year are maybe not dealing specifically with sustainability measures at their company, or work directly with the data science. But it's important, I think, to make sure and get this survey, this mirror board, this replay in the hands of the people at the company to be able to contribute to this, because this knowledge is what we need to be able to build upon this information.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, because we combine three things from the data, and that's what we do when we do a carbon assessment report. We need information from the finance. We need information from, I would say, the setup, the infrastructure. That's mainly the CTO stuff. And then we obviously need information from the operations. And it's very different people with very different mindsets, very different tools. To actually put together a real overview of what is sustainability, we need information from all those people. So that's where gathering all of that is probably the biggest challenge.
Any other questions from the chat or anybody? I know this is a lot of really heavy, deep thinking, but if anyone has any questions, I think we'll wrap up then. It was a great panel. Yeah. Well, again, this information is going to take time to probably input, but it is going to stay open again, so you have time to input, and then also we'll resend out the survey again if you didn't have a chance to work on it the first time. We are looking at doing this again next year, so one of the things I will put up again as a last, can I switch the slide over to this last slide here? Present. There we go, great. Is just a quick reminder that the Miro board will still be open, but also this Discord server link is really important to keep the conversation going. A year is a long time, but it'll be here before you know. And it's really important, I think, to have a collection of voices that are sharing projects that you're working on, different findings, different reports that you come across, because I think it's important to curate all of this material and documents into a place that people have access to, and particularly get into hands like yourself, who measure these things and do this for a living, so that you can tell the rest of us, what we need to do properly.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge to get that, and the more we can mutualize, for example, in carbon calculation for production, there's at least 10 different studies on the impact of electricity generators on set,
whether, I mean, we could have done with 2 or 3. But at some point we need to make sure at the European level, but I mean at the global level. So that's why it was great to have Barbara, the initiatives we have at SEMT with the EBU, getting the BAFTA and Albert on board. We need to share information and try to avoid redoing things, because that's not very efficient.
Yeah, I agree. So thank you very much. Thank you again to our host, Breda, for letting us do this, VP Green. They worked very, very hard putting this together. Also, Sir Citric, who is our sponsor, Workflowers, for presenting and keynoting and chairing, and it's fantastic. And we hope to see you next year. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You know what?